سينحصر في انطلاق المفاوضات الفلسطينية.
The results of the meeting will be limited to launching new Palestinian-Israeli negotiations because the Palestinian delegate is going to Aneapolis empty-handed, as they haven't agreed to a declaration of principles document or a timetable. Also, the Israeli impractical conditions and demands have made the preparatory negotiations reach a deadlock.
Participation of Arab countries has also been the center of discussion, where observers believe that Israel's intentions for participating in the Aneapolis meeting is to normalize with the regional countries. But statements for Saudi Minister of Exterior Saud al-Faisal have showed a clear agenda for the participation of the Arab countries, in which the Palestinian case is to be the center of negotiations.
نحن في الجبهة الشعبية لتحرير فلسطين ندعو العرب عموما وعلى رأسها المملكة.
We in the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine call upon the Arab countries in general and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in particular to object to normalization with the Israeli entity until it responds to the Palestinian demands and their national rights, and we ask them all to insist on establishing a Palestinian state. And we also ask the Palestinians themselves to reunite and end the state of division in order to retrieve the national unity.
And while Palestinians on the official level have showed their skepticism towards the meeting or the possibility of any tangible results coming out of it, Palestinians on the streets have also been divided between optimists and pessimists.
The meeting, God willing, will be a success and it may get this blockade lifted and the borders open. All these meetings are a failure and negotiations never worked with the Israelis. I support the Aneapolis meeting, but only if the internal situation had been more stable so the Palestinian demands can be stronger. But not now, as Gaza and the West Bank are divided, which weakening the Palestinian situation. I'm optimistic about the Aneapolis meeting, and God willing it will bring us good results and guarantee the refugees' right to return to Jerusalem, and the whole situation may become stable.
This anticipated meeting has created so much contradictory opinions, where expectations remain very low, and not more than a new declaration of principles, as well as launching of yet more negotiations, is to be the outcome of the meeting. The US-led meeting, which is expected to launch a starting point towards a Palestinian state, has been met with a lot of conflicting reactions. But it's only a matter of short time before all this ambiguity is cleared out. Mahal Banna from the Chessboard, Gaza, Palestine.
Welcome back, dear viewers. You've been watching your program on the Chessboard, and the topic is the Aneapolis conference. Now, Dr. AbdelAziz, back to you, and let's talk about a very important issue, which is basically, obviously, the Arab representation level. Yes. This time, it's in the Ministers of Foreign Affairs levels, almost all of them. It's the first time the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia attend such a conference with this magnitude. This is basically a request by United States to make this conference successful. In the meantime, this also, the response of the Arabs to be represented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs show the seriousness for them to reach a settlement or permanent solution to this issue. How do you view this? Do you think the Arabs will be rewarded by showing maybe some seriousness regarding this matter?
I think it showed wisdom. You know, when I saw the Arab League meeting last week, that decided to send this large delegation to the conference, it showed wisdom, because it's really important not to let any chance, no matter how small, go without taking advantage of it. And so I think we saw a change in the position of the Arab League, that that despite skepticism, and it's healthy to be skeptical, it's important to be skeptical, not to be over optimistic or expect too much from this conference. So I think it showed realism. And they decided to give it all what they have. It's true that the Americans wanted that, but also I think the Arab League, the foreign ministers, found it in our interest, in the Arab interest, to to also send a high-level delegation, a large delegation, to show that the commitment to peace is not just one or two or three states, but actually the whole Arabs. I think there were no dissenting voices, because I think the other thing which also showed concern, I think, that the Palestinians have very few other options. It's either the status quo, which is, I think, Saeed described. It's creeping annexation. It's the humiliation of the occupation. It's the stealing of Palestinian land and water, and all of that. And the other option is probably to be, at best, second-class citizens of the State of Israel for Palestinians. So there are very few viable options, especially given the fact that the Palestinians themselves are now not fully united, or whether in their goals or in the modalities that they would like to pursue for peace. So I think at best, and I think everybody probably who's at least in the process, I'm not talking about people who are dreaming about final solutions or ultimate solutions, but I think people who are in the process probably at best hope that this conference will have modalities, will have agreement on some timetable, no matter how vague it is, and with that the understanding that if the settlement activity, for example, if it's not stopped, completely stopped, at least it will be slowed down. That the incursions by the Israelis, even if they continue, at least they would be less violent, and so on. It's just to be realistic. And so if the conference produces agreement on those modalities, on what to do next, rather than try to solve the three final status issues all in one swoop, in 1 week or 1 month or even 1 year, Jerusalem, the borders and the refugees, try to solve them, in a couple of days or in weeks or months, I think it's going to be not realistic. And so the best is to try to agree to a timetable, to revive the roadmap, to give some commitment to the Arab Initiative, for example.
Let me go to Washington, D.C. We'll come back to discuss this point, because it's very important what you just said, and it's very interesting. Mr. Meyer, welcome to the program again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Mr. Meyer, how did the U.S. media responded to the conference, and do you think they are part of the problem in sometimes siding with the Israel point of view?
Well, the United States media is certainly taking this very seriously. They see it as a big initiative. They're skeptical about how well it will work. They're asking questions about President Bush, seeing him in his final year in office. How much political capital does he have? Will he be able to succeed? He's had other political defeats recently. So they're taking it seriously, but there's a lot of skepticism. And again, obviously, the support for Israel in the United States is quite strong. And there's a question of will President Bush and the American leadership be willing to nudge or put pressure on Israel in any way to try to get some sort of agreement.
Now, Mr. Meyer, you mentioned a very important and interesting point just a few minutes ago, and you said that the American media looked at the timing of the peace conference. Do you think that will be an issue? At least Israel will not bow to pressure because they feel that Bush is leaving in almost a year from now. We are talking about an election that will take place in less than a year.
Right. The timing about this conference is a little strange. President Bush has more or less remained on the sidelines for the past 7 years with sort of periodic stabs at diplomacy. So to make a big push at this time seems a little strange. He's down to about his final year in office. The atmosphere between the Israelis and the Palestinians is not good at this point. Mahmoud Abbas and Ehud Olmert are both politically weak, as is President Bush. So there's a lot of things about the timing and the attempt to go forward right now which seem a little bit strange. And I think that does add to the doubts and skepticism about the chances for success. Nonetheless, these sides haven't talked or held any serious negotiations for 7 years. So the mere fact that they're starting to talk again is not a bad thing. But I think these factors are going to come into play as they try to address some of the serious issues.
Do you think it's too little, too late? And do you think also it's an image basically enhancing by the United States government, or by Bush administration in particular, try to enhance their image in the Middle East after the big damage that took place after the Iraqi war and some other incidents along with that in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the globe?
Absolutely. Clearly, the Bush administration has seen its Middle East policies not work nearly as well as they would have liked. And they clearly wanted to improve that image, that reputation, and have a success before they leave office. Condoleezza Rice has become a big proponent of this process, and she will be the driving force on the American side. I don't expect President Bush to become intimately involved in any negotiations, but I think we will see Condoleezza Rice front and center making a big push. We have not seen a lot of that in the past, and we'll have to see. I think this issue has its own dynamic, so I don't think that issues in Iraq or Afghanistan will directly affect the Israeli-Palestinian discussions. It could have an indirect effect, and the general mood of the region could have some impact. But I think the Israeli-Palestinian talks will have their own dynamic. I think Condoleezza Rice will be working closely with the leaders on both sides, and they will succeed or fail pretty much on their own terms, not on other issues in the broader region.
But Madrid conference is maybe the closest format to this conference, which is Aneapolis conference. Now, the high representation of Arab in this conference maybe showed some kind of seriousness by the Arab part, at least. Do the American media, share this view?
Yes, I mean, I think it was important to see this high-level Arab representation, broad and high-level. Many of the foreign ministers here, the Saudi delegation was of particular importance to the Bush administration, so they're very pleased with that. And this process is going to need all the help it can get, and to the extent that it does have the blessing of Arab countries, it will help. Again, it's going to be a long, hard process, and without the blessing of Arab countries and the broader Muslim world, I think that the chance of success would be even lower. So it is significant that we do see this sort of participation, especially since the Palestinians are so divided, and Hamas and many of its supporters are skeptical or outright opposed to this conference. The fact that we do see this Arab participation is significant and will help its chances.
Okay, Mr. Meyer, stay with us. We're going to watch this report from Washington, D.C. about Aneapolis conference. Stay with us. I will be back with more.
After months of preparation, the Aneapolis Peace Conference has convened, and President Bush surprised the participants by announcing there is a Palestinian-Israeli agreement on ending the negotiations by 2008. But there was no agreement on how to solve the main topics like Jerusalem, the return of refugees, and the border of the Palestinian state.
We meet to lay the foundation for the establishment of a new nation, a democratic Palestinian state that will live side by side with Israel in peace and security. We meet to help bring an end to the violence that has been the true enemy of the aspirations of both the Israelis and Palestinians. We're off to a strong start. I'm about to read a statement that was agreed upon by our distinguished guests. The representatives of the government of the State of Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, represented respectively by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and President Mahmoud Abbas in his capacity as chairman of the PLO Executive Committee and president of the Palestinian Authority, have convened in Annapolis, Maryland, under the auspices of President George W. Bush of the United States of America, and with the support of the participants of this international conference, having concluded the following joint understanding. We express our determination to bring an end to bloodshed, suffering, and decades of conflict between our peoples, to usher in a new era of peace based on freedom, security, justice, dignity, respect, and mutual recognition, to propagate a culture of peace and nonviolence, to confront terrorism and incitement, whether committed by Palestinians or Israelis. In furtherance of the goal of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, we agree to immediately launch good faith bilateral negotiations in order to conclude a peace treaty resolving all outstanding issues, including all core issues without exception as specified in previous agreements. We agree to engage in vigorous, ongoing, and continuous negotiations and shall make every effort to conclude an agreement before the end of 2008.
The Palestinians, supported by the Arab states in the conference, hold their ground and refuse to give in for the most important Israeli demand, which is to acknowledge Israel as a Jewish state.
Mr. Prime Minister, I wish that we together continue and closely work in order to achieve a historical mission that we have waited for too long. Each one of us must pitch in our weight and experience and sense of resolve in order to overcome the obstacles that we will face and to close the gaps between our positions in a bid to achieve a solution that would end occupation and the long years of suffering of the refugees and ensure good neighborly relations, economic cooperation, humanitarian openness, so that all of them would ensure guarantees for peace that are stronger than any documents, commitments, or pledges, despite the importance of these.
As for the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, he is happy to see many Arab countries around the table, but he did not get what he most wanted, an Arab recognition of the Jewishness of the State of Israel and normalization with the Arab states.
But I came here, despite the concerns and the doubts and the hesitations, to say to you, President Mahmoud Abbas, and through you, to your people, and to the entire Arab world, the time has come. We no longer, and you no longer, have the privilege of adhering to dreams which are dissevered from the sufferings of our peoples, the hardships that they experience daily, and the burden of living under ongoing uncertainty, which offers no hope of change or of a better future. We want peace. We demand an end to terror, an end to incitement and to hatred. We are prepared to make a painful compromise, rife with risks, in order to realize these aspirations.
Late last night, Secretary Rice hosted an official dinner in the State Department, and it was attended by President George Bush.
We've come together this week because we share a common goal. Two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. Achieving this goal requires difficult compromises, and the Israelis and Palestinians have elected leaders committed to making them. Achieving this goal requires neighbors committed to peace between Israel and a new Palestinian state. And I'm encouraged by the presence of so many here.
In Washington, this is Aziz Fahmy for Chessboard.
Welcome back, dear viewers. Joining us now from Washington, D.C., our correspondent, Mr. Aziz Fahmy. Mr. Aziz, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Aziz, I'm assuming you have attended maybe with the journalists the conference this morning. Have you?
Well, it has been extremely hectic here.
Okay, talk to us about the mood in the Washington, D.C., in the capital, and the United States in their reacting to this very important conference that is trying to reach an agreement between the Arabs and the Israelis and reaching a settled and permanent settlement.
Okay, well, the most important thing is that the basic agreement is that we will delay discussing all the difficult subject until after the conference. The idea of the conference when President Bush suggested that back in July was that the conference will come to some conclusions, will come to some agreements. The Israelis were against that, and they lobbied for 5 months to create what they call the day after the conference. That's why all the disagreements between the Palestinians and the Israeli about the communique, in terms of Jerusalem, in terms of the return of refugees, in terms of the border of a Palestinian state, all these issues have been delayed for the day after the conference. So right now the conference has succeeded only in the sense that everybody has attended, everybody is here sitting on the table and talking about what will happen afterwards. The big good surprise today is that there is at least something written that by the end of 2008 there should be an agreement. What is lacking is the modalities as how we can arrive to that goal. All the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations in the past have dealt exactly with the same problems and failed miserably to reach solution on any of them. These differences remain until today. Until last night, there was meetings between the Palestinians and the Israelis and the State Department official to try to bridge some of these differences. They failed. So what happened now is that everybody's going to go home, and there should be some kind of a direct negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The key will be how much the United States will be involved. If you recall that in the Madrid conference, the Bush administration, that is Bush's father, in 1991, gave all the parties letters of guarantees about what to expect to achieve in the conference. Here we don't have any letters of guarantees. We have only verbal assurances from Secretary Rice and from Prime Minister Olmert. How much this will hold, that is very important. Why Israel refused letters of guarantees? Because letter of guarantees would mean that Washington will have to exert some pressure on Israel if there is no enough Israeli cooperation. So Israel was against the letter of guarantees. There was no letter of guarantees, and there is really no written commitment about what exactly will happen on the three big issues: the return of the
we apologize for the technical
Palestinian state. So
I think we've resumed. Go ahead, Mr. Aziz. I think.
Okay. Did you lose my sound?
No, you're back. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying is that the most important thing about the conference that there has been an agreement to postpone discussing the difficult issues of Jerusalem, the return of refugees, and the border of the Palestinian state until after the conference. And the fact that there was no letter of guarantees is because Israel did not want these letter of guarantees to be used for Washington to pressure Israel to move toward certain conclusions. So it depends really what's going to happen. It depends how active the Bush administration will be. But as Mr. Meyer and everybody else said in the program, the problem is that the president is in the last year in office. There is a presidential election is going on. He still have Iraq. He still have the Iranian nuclear program and so forth. So how much pressure, how much time president will be able to dedicate to this? It's a big question.
Now, how do you see now the Israelis responding to Bush? They know he'll be out of power in like less than a year by declaring the election after November, maybe the middle of November. So how do you think the Israelis will respond to this peace conference, especially taking in consideration that there are a high-level presentation of the Arab countries?
I like what one of your guests from Ramallah said, that we have clouds before we have rain. So it is really obvious what's going to happen next if you look carefully what happened before the conference. And before the conference, the Israeli situation, the internal Israeli situation is extremely divided, is extremely fluid. They were trying to avoid have early elections in Israel. So the agreement about let's not concentrate on the conference, but concentrate on the day after the conference. The purpose of this was to avoid any division within the Israeli coalition. So the Israeli coalition still have its own problem. The internal Israeli dynamics is still impacting on what Prime Minister Olmert can do and cannot do, especially vis-a-vis the return of refugees, the Palestinian borders and the Jerusalem. So it's hard to see how this dynamic will change and what President Bush will do. So it's really a problem of a question of what is the internal situation in Israel even before what is the internal situation in the United States.
Now, Mr. Aziz, just last question before you leave regarding what you just mentioned at the beginning of your responding to one of my questions. You said there have been many attempts that failed between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But let's go back to just the Clinton era, where he had a meeting between President Arafat and Mr. Ishaq Rabin, the former president of Israel. At least the Palestinians got their self-rule in Gaza and the West Bank. And this is, I think, it's basically a good step toward, reaching a final settlement. Don't you think we're going to get something out of this conference?
Well, I mean, the Oslo agreement between late Prime Minister Rabin and late President Arafat was definitely a historic step and a very important step forward. But look, what they did not deal with, what they postponed for later on, is Jerusalem, the refugees, the borders of the Palestinian states. These are the same issues. The question is whether now, under the very divided Israeli political scene, and the last year of President Bush before he leaves the office, whether these two factors can lead to reach a conclusion over these issues. Honestly, I personally am skeptical, but I hope I'm wrong.
Okay. Mr. Aziz Fahmi, our correspondent from Washington, D.C., thank you very much for your good effort and your report as well.
You're welcome.
Now, Dr. AbdelAziz, back to you. And we you talked about the three major issues, which is the border and the establishing a state and the refugees as well, Jerusalem and the refugees as well. Now, President Bush said that 2008 we will reach an agreement.
Yes.
What does he mean by that?
Right. I think the report was quite good in clarifying what we were talking about. It's obvious there was agreement on a few things. And I think things that have been agreed to before as well. One of them is to mutual recognition, meaning two-state solution. Without agreement on the borders or on whether Jerusalem is part of the Palestinian state or not. The other significant agreement was that by the end of 2008, the negotiations should be wrapped up. And that's not too long in the future, considering the long life of this crisis. And just to restate what I said earlier, and in response to what Aziz said, it's really easy and justified to be pessimistic. However, I think a lot would depend on how much commitment the U.S. gives to this process. Let's keep in mind the effort that President Clinton made literally in the final weeks of his presidency. And he worked through until the last day of his term. He almost pulled it off.
He almost.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but those were just few weeks. But because he almost reached agreement on dividing Jerusalem. He almost reached agreement on the borders and swapping land and all of that. And I think the refugee issue was probably too difficult to solve in that short period of time. Now we have more than a year in President Bush's term, if you consider that he will be out of office in January 2009. So if there is commitment by the Americans, if the Arabs and the Palestinians hold the U.S. administration to its promise to be fully engaged in this process from now until the end of President Bush's term, I think you could probably achieve results. Where I'm optimistic in a way is that the same conditions that led President Bush to convene this conference will most likely continue, meaning that I don't expect the situation in Iraq to improve dramatically. And so President Bush and his team will still be looking for something to show for their second term at least. Keep in mind that President Bush actually early on talked about the establishment of two states. He said that in the beginning of his first term. So if we hold him to those promises, and if we engage the U.S. administration to keep the pressure on Israel, to hold it to this promise of wrapping up negotiations by the end of 2008, there is time. There is plenty of time. What I'm afraid of is there is going to be either a violent incident in the occupied territories or in Israel itself, and then it will be used as an excuse by Israel to change this commitment to the end of 2008, and then the Americans would also lay off the pressure on Israel. Obviously, this situation is not going to be solved without.
But didn't you think the American administration have experience now? I mean, obviously, if something going to take place like a violent act or a terrorist act, yes, obviously laying off the pressure won't solve the problem. In fact, that should motivate them to try to solve the issue.
Right, but I think the administration would be constrained by domestic politics of the supporters.
That has been always the case.
Yes, if the supporters of Israel then side with Israel, you know.
Let me go to Gaza and we'll get back to you. Mr. Saad, a very important point, which is the opposing parties in Ramallah. They are very opposing parties like Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and other groups that are opposing the negotiating with Israel. Do you think they may contribute to the failure of this peace process if they do not act at least with maybe neutrality instead of maybe opposing it?
No, as a matter of fact, I'm not that much concerned with the Palestinian factions, even opposing and objecting to the peace process. I'm concerned more with the right-wing Israeli parties as well, who are also trying to do the same. And don't forget that when we are talking about someone might do some terrorist act to sabotage the negotiations, I would remind you and all your viewers as well that Rabin was assassinated by the right-wing Israeli parties as well. So these, let me say, on both sides, there are people who are opposing this peace process. The judging of the successful of this peace process and the acceptance on both sides for the peace process and for the negotiations is how much it would really bring peace between the two people, and to what extent it would help to solve the problem and find a fair solution to the Palestinian question. This is the most important thing. The problem is, after Oslo Agreement and up till now, 14 years ago, we are talking about Israeli strategy, which is launching a process of negotiation and stop there. Continue to negotiate while on the ground they are legalizing the occupation. That's exactly what happened between the years 1993, when Oslo Agreement was reached, and between 2000, the second Intifada, Al-Aqsa Intifada in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip. The reason for the erupt of the Intifada was that the Palestinians had felt that the Israelis were interested in the process of the negotiation rather than doing the negotiation on the ground. On the ground, it was legalization for the occupation. I would just mention one example, that between the years 1967, the beginning of the occupation, and 93, Oslo Agreement, 27 years, and between the years 93 and 2000, 7 years, the number of settlements in these 7 years of the peace process are double the amount of the settlements during the whole period of the occupation. How do you interpret that? It is the Israeli interested in the peace process as a process rather than implementing it, and that's what make it very dangerous for us, even after what is after Aneapolis, that there are no references. The references are still the same. The Israeli will judge and the American would help, but there is no mechanism of the quartet or international community to monitor both sides and to say that this side had done their deeds or not.
Okay. Mr. Meyer in Washington, we know that President Olmert is weak because of many reasons, among them the invasion of Lebanon that took place last summer. What do you think, how do you think he could maybe support the peace process and get something out of it, or at least when he goes back to Israel, he could go back with a very strong mandate? Do you think he could pull it?
Well, certainly there's a large segment of the Israeli population that wants to see some progress in dealing with the Palestinians. He was elected in March of last year, and there was a large majority